Hi, everyone. Hey, what a great morning so far. My name is Scott Skellenger. I'm head of research and development informatics at Amgen. Before we got started, I wanted to lean on something that Chancellor Block said this morning around all of our ability to think and do, and the level of creativity and innovation and our ability to execute. As I was looking around the room this morning with all of you and all the others that we had in the space, the innovation that's happening upstairs on display, it really kind of was a compelling feeling to know that we had so much horsepower and we can do so much good for patients, and our future is so bright. And so much of that includes our opportunity to innovate around technology. I'm a huge digital transformation fan, have a lot of passion around it. I know everybody sitting here has a lot of passion around it. There is just a tidal wave of data, given the quantification of biology, the work that we have in transforming the way clinical development is achieved, and the experience that we're creating at the end of the day at the point of care for patients. And so before we get kicked off, we're going to go through some introductions, and then we'll have a discussion. So Joycelynne, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. My name is Joycelynne Palmer. I'm from City of Hope, and I'm the Director of Biostatistics, and I also oversee all of the statistical design work for the Hematologic Malignancies Research Institute.
That's great. And Steve?
Good morning. I'm Steve Dubinett. I'm the Interim Dean for the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. I also direct the Clinical Translational Science Institute for UCLA, and I'm a lung cancer investigator in the Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center.
Thanks so much. Matt?
I'm Matt Thomson. I'm a professor of computational biology at Caltech. I do single-cell genomics. I also run a single-cell genomics center that profiles cells for people across campus and across the city. And my original background was in physics and in building models of physical systems.
That's great.
Good morning, folks. My name is Ranju. I'm the CEO of Optum Labs, which is the research and development arm of United Health Group. Our primary function is to do research for the payer part of the world, the providers, and with a primary focus of patient to deliver to United's mission of making every life healthier. And super excited to be here this morning.
Thank you. Thank you all. Given the way that we architected this panel and thinking about the impact that AI and machine learning are having on the commercialization process across molecules, getting them into the point of care, the differences in treatment planning, I thought what I would do is start with you, Matt, and a question around how AI and ML in early discovery are being used with just the profound exponential growth in data that we're seeing as new technologies like next generation sequencing, proteomics, transcriptomics, metabolomic data coming into full fold. What does it look like from your perspective?
So the last 10 years have been unbelievably exciting and really revolutionary on the measurement side. So I guess a couple points I want to make. So the first point is measurement capacity has absolutely exploded over the last 5 or 10 years, driven a lot by sequencing. My first independent lab was in San Francisco at UCSF. In 2011, we could profile 10 cells at a cost of $1,000 a cell. Now we can profile 1 million cells a day at about the same cost. And that kind of explosion is happening across single-cell genomics, spatial transcriptomics, genetics. And so on the measurement side, there's really this question of how do we integrate all of that data, make sense of it? How do we apply this across diseases and therapeutics to really build a molecular portrait of disease physiology? But then there's also the intervention piece, techniques like AlphaFold, machine learning strategies for doing, studying small molecules and proteins are allowing us to sort of predict whole new ways of intervening in systems across disease states. So something we think a lot about is how is this going to be driven through the clinical process? How are clinical trials, Joycelynne and I were just talking about this, going to incorporate this kind of unbelievable data? And what are the computational methods that are going to be required to give us kind of this new vision and view of disease all the way from like diagnosis to treatment and personalized medicine?
And I think the assumption there too is that we're just going to see an increase in the number of molecules traveling through the pipe, given all these innovations in the early discovery phase. Joycelynne, you spend a lot of time in the translational space and in clinical trial design. How do you think about how we're going to cope with that sheer volume or increase of projects that are coming through, the more complex companion diagnostics that we assume will be a part of that? How does that look to you in your seat?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from our point of view within the discipline of biostatistics, we have to sort of make sense of this information that's coming from places like what Matt was just describing in those labs. And so what we're presented with today, which is quite a bit different from 10 years ago, is that we have very clear understanding or a clear understanding of the disease, the mechanisms associated with disease resistance, how disease is overcome, drug sort of attack. And so what happens is we're often given multiple candidate therapies is really what happens. So they take the information that Matt and others in his field sort of come up with in terms of characterization. The basic scientists develop agents to attack the vulnerabilities that are exposed through that work. And then they bring 10, 12 different agents or diseases that have similar phenotypes, genotypes, and want us to develop trials around this. And so this idea of having, and we were talking about this morning, having a single trial with one agent and one disease is not sort of the game we're playing anymore. Now we've moved on to platform trials, master protocols, where we have the ability to plug and play diseases, treatments, depending on what's known and where the investigative process is going. And the last thing I'll say, just as part of my opening remarks, is our colleagues in the labs are becoming even more critical in sort of making decisions about where we go with the trial. So where we would collect samples up, longitudinally, store them away, and then analyze them at the end of the study or halfway through the study, that's no longer the case. We actually have to have a lot of the analyses that Matt and, again, folks in his field sort of carry out for us in close to real time so we can make decisions about the effectiveness. Are we really hitting the targets that we're expecting? If it's a biologic, is it persisting for a length of time that we think will impact the overall disease process? So it's the landscape, as I'm sure we all sort of have a sense of this, has changed quite a bit. And so as biostatisticians, we're now developing and coming up with new innovative trial designs to address this.
Yeah, thanks, Joycelynne. And it has me thinking a little bit about, as we get down to the point of care and sort of more medicines with more complex companion diagnostics and in silico capabilities come to the point of care. What does it look like from a physician's perspective? Steve, for a long time, I think we had a conversation about the stethoscope and an ace bandage, right? And kind of how far we've come. So when you think about AI and ML and the need for the ability to interpret simply and factor into treatment planning, what does that look like from a physician's perspective, Steve?
And so, as we've undergone this phenomenal increase in the technology for single cells, as we've reformed the way in which we've done clinical research, we've also created the infrastructure for the transformation of medicine clinically. And that has to do with the clinical development of clinical data warehouses at individual institutions, such as we have at UCLA. But also, very importantly, the linkage both in federated systems across many institutions and now even integrated warehouses. One example of an integrated warehouse is the University of California warehouse of 15 million patients in a single warehouse. Another example is what's been created by the NIH, which is a federation among 54 academic medical centers and 150 million patients. So we can begin to query the omics of clinical information and apply that over, beginning now, the other omic data sets from clinical investigation and laboratory science. What that will lead to in the future is the ability for me to see a patient and apply all of the information that is available to us from thousands and millions of other patients that have that genotype and phenotype. The actual application of that is the transformation of medicine. And so, what we talked about was the system up till now, which is those of us with gray hair are turned to as the experts for clinical information. But we quickly realized that learning theorists tell us that I could apply, at best, on a good day, 5 pieces of data to a clinical decision, when in fact I will need to understand and have at my disposal the synthesis of thousands and millions of data points. The information we can gain over time from the warehouses will allow us to incite to gain the information and confirm clinical trials by real life existence of treatment of patients and have a revolution for how we create the next generation of clinical care and therapeutics.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and that has me thinking of the words that come to mind are more certain treatment planning at the point of care. So the ability to know that with more confidence that treatments are going to work. And Ranju, I think a little bit of the work that you do at Optum, and I know you guys are heavy investors in the AI and ML space. How do you think about the transformation that happens from your perspective when you have more certain treatment planning, better quantification of disease and the biology of individuals? And what does that do from a confidence in payment? What does that do from a risk management perspective? Things that are a factor in the ecosystem that we exist within in healthcare today.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's a very interesting time for what we do within United Health R&D, because we get to stand on shoulders of this really tall research body work that's happening in the academia and the research space. But we also have the unique advantage of being in the forefront, right? And get to see the 360. The payer perspective, the provider perspective, right? How do you even get these solutions to them in a way that it helps them, right? Because it seems like from our vantage, these 3 corners of the triangle seems to be pulling each other out a little bit, right? The individual that wants best health, the provider that wants to do the best, and the reimbursement aspect, and then the payer, of course, is a thing. So I think we see this in a much more holistic way, where the exciting part of our job is to almost see that as a research involved in the last mile of delivery, where we, on the payer side, have to make sure it matches and meets the regulatory need that a lot of the insurance part of the business has to comply to. From a provider side, I think it's the point of the clinical point of interaction with the patient, right? Is the data available when they can actually meaningfully apply it? Are they trained even in many of the pragmatic aspect of getting probably a lot of the omics data is that, do they know when to really ask for the right test, right? Who will cover for the test? What is the cost of the test? So a lot of our research is in those areas. And then finally, I think there's a little bit of work we get to do in trying to understand the moment of elasticity with the members or the individuals. Like, when would they react to a guidance to get a test done better than not, right? Because if you told me, get a genetics test done, I'm like, okay, awesome, I'm a scientist, I'll get it done. But if you told me at a point where I'm worried about a certain health issue or I came out of an ER, I might more likely react to that request. So we get to kind of look at the 360. The pragmatic aspect that I talked about comes in the notion of, we do worry about data privacy a lot, right? That's in our DNA. Customer privacy, our patient privacy is super important for us. It does create meaningful challenges, especially when you want to do AI and ML, right? I think we are finding the data that are very federated data access for machine learning seems like a really meaningful foundational investment we need to make, because it's still a bit of a work in progress for us. I think data bias is a real thing, right? Where we are inside United Health very committed to not only for ourselves, but for the industry, figure out how to work around those data bias and create equity in the systems across the board. So exciting time for us, and I think the work we do, we focus on the impact, right? We get to leverage a lot of this research work and then figure out how can we really truly deliver it to the market in a way that it's pragmatic and it scales.
Yeah, thank you, Ranju. And your comments make me think a lot about how the clinical care pathway evolves from something that's relatively static to and canonized to something that's dynamic in the face of more data and more analytics and more interpretation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all the same question, and we'll go through for the remainder of our time. So the question would be for each of you in your discipline. What excites you most, and what do you think is the most important thing to get right from an AI and ML perspective in order to create value and really get from the think to the do the way that Chancellor Block talked about? And so, Matt, why don't you give that one a go?
So the main thing that I would emphasize is that we have access to unbelievable amounts of data. It's true. So people at Cedars can take hundreds of breast cancer patients and build micron-scale molecular pictures of their tumors, ask if they're responding to an immunotherapy or not, and give us molecular signatures in the people who respond and don't respond. And so that data collection ability is amazing for stratifying disease states, classifying disease states. But how do we apply it to actually develop new therapies and new interventions? That's something I'm really passionate about, is can we build predictive models using this data of human biology that lets us actually design, new small molecules, new proteins that might work in ways that we didn't previously understand, that might target new pathways. So that's the thing that I think is both the most exciting thing and also the thing that I think we have to get right, so that we need enormous data integration capabilities, but also this kind of deep focus on prediction and understanding the molecular pathways of disease and how to impact them and how to ultimately predict that what we're doing, how it's going to respond to a particular patient and a particular type of cancer or autoimmune disease, for example.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Joycelynne, how would you answer that question? So you're most excited about what's the most important to get right from an AI and ML perspective when we look at the data, perhaps in the clinical space?
Yeah, I think I share the same sort of sentiment that what I'm most excited about is what I think we also need to get right, which is using, as trials or clinical research is progressing, that we're able to leverage the information that's coming out of these AI and ML models to help inform sort of the direction of these studies. Like the idea, I think, in terms of getting it right, we can't think anymore about clinical trials being this static thing that you design and you put it on the shelf and let it run for 3 years. I think that it has to be a dynamic interaction, again, back with what's coming from the lab, from the actual patients that are being treated on this study, this kind of back translation idea where we get the information, we take it back to the lab, and we have sort of this dynamic action that's going on around the trial where we bring in the AI, we bring in the ML. And I think that sort of my wish is that someone in this room or maybe on the stage can figure out how to more easily amass data and samples. I mean, if we don't have that information, we're not going to have the elegant models that we want. And I just feel like it still costs too much money, and too much time to sort of get this in place. And so whatever the regulation is necessary to sort of overcome that, the financial barriers, I'd love for the government to invest in this kind of thing more, I think is really necessary if we're going to be able to leverage. I think a lot of the approaches and the methodologies that are being developed now will show up with no data to really use, right, or a limited capacity to really predict and inform. And so I feel like we've got to put some big investment into that. It's not the sexy stuff, it's not the attractive stuff, but it's necessary. It's like the foundation.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point that the models themselves are one piece, but they don't do too much without the underpinning ground truth and the data that we are leaning on. And so the importance of aggregating data and making it available to folks who can build models around it and make use of it is a really powerful idea. Steve, what do you think?
Well, actually, I was thinking of the word prediction. So just as Matt and Joycelynne have said, the critical point will be our ability to predict. Every clinical pathway cries out for prediction. Because what we're concerned about in operations of quality of care, patient safety, and cost containment are research topics. Our transformation will be dependent upon that. And also the recognition that the importance of the social determinants of health are paramount, in that 85% of our health is determined not by what happens within a hospital or clinic walls, but our activities of daily living. The ability to capture that data set temporally and ongoing is our next challenge. And that will afford us to really do, on an ongoing basis, make those predictions that really matter for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Ranju, what do you think?
Yeah, I think agree with everything I heard here. I think if I was having Aaron Halperin from UCLA heads our machine learning. We have Tanzim Chowdhury from Cornell who heads our digital signals. And the discussion we almost always end with, it's not just the multi-omics, right? We need behavioral data, we need clinical data, we need actually the biomedical information, we need the literature, we need the environmental data. And for me, the excitement is actually we are in a position, we're in this research org of an organization that can meaningfully implement the real world solution that allows us to get the real world data, right? So I think that excites me a lot from what we are focusing from our research. I think in that comes this problem that I, having spent my last 15 years in AI/ML product development, is that I think we also need to tune our problem definition, right? Because I think there's a lot of solution, and then we start looking for problems, and that seems to create more cycles. So there's a lot of problem hunting happens because we have smart solutions and really smart people in the floor. I think where we can add value through collaboration is that identifying the key problem, right? At the end of the day, for a real societal change, quality of care, gap in care, and the cost of care, right? And then hopefully this holy grail of personalized medicine, right? That's exciting. But I also think it's would need a lot of collaboration. I love what I heard here about even including federal agencies getting involved and whatnot. And I think that's both exciting and challenging from what we do.
Yeah, thank you. So one more opportunity. Any final thoughts before we adjourn?
No, I just want to compliment the organizers of this wonderful meeting today, that this is even a topic. I think that most people are interested in AI and machine learning, but it's sort of, at least in the circles I travel and the meetings I go to, it's sort of a footnote to the larger, science that's being discussed. And so I think this is just, kudos to the organizers to make this front and center and to sort of appreciate the importance of this topic. So, and thank you in closing. Thank you.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree, and great applause to our organizers. Sometimes we frequently talk at UCLA about going from cells to society. How do we make that real? It's through our ability to utilize these phenomenal resources that have gathered, the technologies that are available to us. And because of that, I'm quite optimistic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Matt?
So I agree with everything that was inside. Wonderful event. And one of the things that's been fun about this conversation is it highlights the importance of sort of bringing information from different levels of the stack together and integrating them, as far back as I am or as far forward as clinical practice and clinical trials. And I may have too much data and Joycelynne has too little data, and we can kind of, there are different reasons for that, and the cost side and the care side and the quality side are all very important. So I feel like more discussions like this are really going to be important for driving ML across patient care.
Yeah, totally agree. Ranju?
I agree. Thanks for the event, UCLA at TDE. That's phenomenal. Thank you for having me in this group. I think what stood out to me as I was walking the floor is that a lot of innovations happening, right? And a lot of really smart people are very passionate about this space. I think these sort of events hopefully allows for more channels of collaboration, which I think systemically we don't do as well, right? We do this discussion, then we go sit in our silos and get busy with what we do. I think we need to do more of these, because I think as we break these silos, as we have better understanding of what you're doing, just helps us create the solution that society can interface with, right?
Yeah.
Exciting, super exciting, and thank you for having us here.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Thanks for the final thoughts. I think the challenge of persisting the relationships that we create here today for the betterment of that collaboration and to be able to carry it forward, I think is one that we can all carry. I'd just like to thank you all for being here. Thanks to the UCLA TDG. LABEST is an awesome event. It gets all of us together to just recognize how much innovative and execution power that we have as a team. And I can't wait to see what we all do together. So thank you all for your time and interest in the topic. Really appreciate it.